Welcome back to the Range Minded Podcast. You know who I am. I'm Steve, and you know where I am. I'm in the studio. Today we're going to talk about something that sometimes can be controversial, sometimes even be a little conspiratorial. You, my friends, are being manipulated. Every time you turn on your TV, listen to the radio, open your socials, everything you see is being engineered to make you feel a certain way. That's right. We're going to talk about media manipulation. I'm not talking about straight up lies. No, that's not quite how it works. I'm talking about engineered words, phrases, images, or actions that you see that really changes how you perceive what's going on in the world around you. Imagine you turn on the TV, you live in, Seattle. You turn on the news, your local news, the news station in Phoenix, a news station in Texas, and in DC, all saying the exact same things, word for word. You've seen the video. Or across the bottom of the chyron there, it says, mostly peaceful protest. While in the background, buildings and cars are on fire, and people are rioting pretty violently. You see, the words that the media uses isn't always the message that's being shared. And it's important to understand that as we view the world around us. We need to say to ourselves, what does this news or this story want us to know? Because once we really dissect into what's really being said, then we can understand where the manipulation is coming from. This is important, and I think we need to talk about it. This is not conspiracy theory. This goes all the way back to a man named Edward Bernays. You should look into see who his uncle was. And his view of public relations. You see, he was a master at learning how to sell products or principles or even emotions to the public. It is important for you and for me, anybody that's trying to stay range-minded, let's use that as a phrase, to really get a clear sight picture of what's going on in the world around us so we can extrapolate the real story from the news that's being presented to us. I think this is important. We're going to cover some of the techniques and some real world examples from history that shows how this is done. And also, I want to look at how groups like Mom Demand Action or Everytown uses or chooses to use information in a certain way to manipulate the public into feeling their way into a decision instead of actually using the facts that almost always contradict the story that they're presenting. I say almost always because sometimes even the pro-gunners fall into the act of sharing just enough or just the right information to invoke an emotional response. In this episode, I really want to dive into some of the real techniques. Let's look at some of the things that are being done. Let's look at how certain organizations that maybe hate your Second Amendment rights, Moms with Cats, and every mayor grumpiness, they use information in a way that benefits them and not the consumer of that information. They use emotionally based arguments and skewed statistics to leverage their perspective, and again, to invoke an emotional response, instead of going to the source, the FBI, the CDC, or independent researchers to really find out what the information says and what the truth is. We have to be extremely careful every time we turn on our device, click on a video, even mine for that matter. We need to understand what the message is being shared or what the message is that they want us to hear. Those are two very different things, and I hope we can kind of dig into the difference of those two. First of all, it's important to understand that the media does not have to fabricate everything to get the story across. They just have to use selected words or frame the story in a certain way that it invokes an emotional response. You see, word choice or sentence structure changes the narrative of the entire thing. For example, here's a couple of sentences, paragraphs, to help you understand what I'm trying to say here. Now I'm going to read them, so excuse me while I look at my notes. Example 1. A group of concerned citizens gathered peacefully to voice their opposition. Versus radical activists and extremists descend on the courthouse, threatening public order. Same story, same event, but how the use of words change the narrative and how the reader or consumer of the news intakes that information. Want another? Let's try this one. So, sometimes it's how the voice sounds. The passive voice hides the blame. Mistakes were made in handling of evidence. Or officials mishandled the evidence. You see, if it's passive, it kind of pushes the blame along and creates an innocent narrative, where if you want to cause a conviction or accusation, it's they mishandled the information. Again, how it's framed, how it's structured, how it's presented creates the narrative that the consumer sees. Starting to make sense? How about this one? Tax relief that lets working families keep more of what they earn versus tax cuts for the wealthy that explode the deficit. They're still tax cuts, but if they express the story just a little bit differently, one sounds favorable and one does not. Again, framing and narrative, huge on how the news is presented to you, the consumer. Or how about this one? Police shoot the suspect during a confrontation versus an unarmed man gunned down in cold blood. You see, again, sounds like a stop by the police. Maybe some kind of altercation broke out. A man had the gun or somehow caused harm to the policeman who had to shoot. Or the cops just shot him. Again, we see this very tactic happening in news very currently. Something about a knife and a track meet comes to mind. Framing presents the news in a totally different way when it's presented in two different fashions. It creates an emotional understanding of what the story is or sometimes is not. Here's another trick that they often use. It would be reporting or omission, presenting the facts or creatively leaving the facts out. Let's look at this. Another tactic they like to use is selective reporting or omission. Either presenting some of the facts, not all of them, but some of the facts, or creatively leaving the facts out. Again, that creates a narrative or it frames a story in a specific way. Another creative tactic is engineering emotional appeals or fear-mongering, creating some kind of urgency or tugging at the heartstrings. All of these are specific ways to steer your understanding of the story in a way that really does manipulate you into feeling bad or worrying about something in a sense of urgency. It's a tactic, or these are tactics that are always used. Always. No matter what news channel or what news source you're consuming. Another tactic that they often likes to use is they stage these things. They astroturf. They create events that didn't really happen. Or they present something that's far more than reality. Astroturfing. not real grass. It's the fake grass that looks real, right? Another very common tactic is visual manipulation. They crop out a photo just to maybe not share the entire visual picture, or they zoom in when something is inconvenient during a live broadcast. That also can generate a narrative. Another one you'll see is repetition, whether it be on the same news channel or across many news channels. The story is the same, just spread out all over the place to try and create legitimacy or authority of the story. Or something else is the setting of an agenda. You see, if they can create the perception that it is far more prevalent than it really is, then it becomes urgent or real or big and scary. But what's the agenda? What are they trying to manipulate you into? Or what response do they want you to have? That's a big question. Another one that's becoming far more prevalent, if I can say the word, and honestly scary, is all the new digital tools that are out there. They use bots to engineer content online, or now AI, which is becoming very convincing and honestly very scary. You know, Jim Breuer, I don't know if you remember him or not. He's a comedian from the 80s and 90s. Funny guy, I think. He's also a pretty good thinker. He presented, or a while ago, I assume, I just saw the short last night, about AI. And how new is AI was basically the gist of his conversation. You know, we think when we get on X that a lot of this new AI slop is just that, new. But he referenced Star Wars, whatever episode it was. The one with Princess Leia as old. And another actor. Both of them dead. But they used AI to regenerate them in the film. The entire, not just one scene or two. But they put them in the entire movie. We also saw that with Paul Walker after he passed away in Fast and Furious 7406. AI's been around a long time. So how much are we paying attention to that? That's where it gets scary. They can create people to say whatever they want. Or maybe they can create a person that doesn't quite exist in places that they should, if that makes any kind of cryptic sense whatsoever. I mentioned Edward Bernays a little bit earlier in the video. Again, this was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. I guess you could call him a psychologist. The dude was kind of a whack job, but what do I know? Anyways, Bernays was a master at manipulating society. Something he would call the engineering of consent. One example was he had a few women during the suffrage movement smoking Lucky Strike cigarettes as a image of solidarity and breaking the norms. He was also really good at paying doctors to write reports or statements about how certain foods were healthy. And by paying these doctors, it gave these reports more authority. It wasn't about health. It was about manipulating the public into believing that certain foods were better than others. He was a genius at how to manipulate society. Public relations was kind of his kink, if you will. You need to look into him and see some of the stuff that he did to manipulate society. It's quite shocking and interesting at the same time. Modern media still builds off of his framework. Now, some of you might remember the first Gulf War. In the 1990s, there was a young girl named, hopefully I can get her name right, Nayra, a 15-year-old girl. This Nayra girl testified in front of Congress that the Iraqis were going into hospitals, taking babies off incubators, throwing them on the floor, and letting the baby die in a cold, awful, and heartless way. That itself caused a stir among the American public to endorse going to war with the Iraqis. Now, later it was found out that she was paid $15 million to fabricate this story to generate an emotional response. It wasn't true, and just to make sure it wasn't true, they sent the Americans, or independent, somebody sent doctors into these hospitals to see if these things were true, and they obviously were not. Again, somebody was paid to fabricate a story. The story was showed to millions of Americans. It had some sort of authority to it because she lived there. She supposedly saw this experience happen, only to be a lie that manipulated millions into being more for going to war with another country. Pretty interesting, huh? But that's not all. A few years later, about a decade later, again, I remember this, WMDs. Now, after 9/11, we were sold a bill of goods that there were weapons of mass destruction. And if we weren't going to get to them first, Al-Qaeda was going to scoop these up and use them against the American public. I remember sitting watching these congressional hearings, hearing how dangerous these were and how we have to act immediately to get over there. We all bought it. We all believed it. Millions of Americans bit the bait. We believed it. Only to find out a few years later that didn't exist. It was fake. It was a fabricated story. A story presented to millions and millions of Americans on public TV by people in authority, and we perceived that because of their authority, it had to be true. And yet, it wasn't. Some of you might remember this clip from a few years back from the Sinclair Media Group. I believe it's a Sinclair Broadcast Group. I gotta make sure I get that right. Where hundreds of TV channels, news stations across the United States shared a promo that was verbatim, word for word, exactly the same, and published at the same time. So when you turned on the TV, you heard the broadcasters in your local news share an important message that was fabricated and given to every news station in that media group and shared at the exact same time. That doesn't sound like independent journalism. That doesn't sound like news that impacts you at home. That sounds like a message generated and disseminated to be given to the public as a comfort dose of media slop. Again, manipulation. That's something that you need to pay attention to. We touched on this earlier as well. Check out this picture of this news. I think it was CNN, actually. The fiery but mostly peaceful interview. Again, you see behind him cars, buildings, fire, rioters. Mostly peaceful. So, I mean, that's nice. Again, he used words to generate an emotional response, hoping that you wouldn't see the image happening right behind your eyes. The sad thing was that many people just listened to those words and didn't believe what their eyes were showing them at the same time. That mostly peaceful mantra, whatever you want to call it, was shared on national news over and over again to try and describe the people's right to peacefully assemble and to protest. But really, it wasn't a protest. It was a violent riot that destroyed millions and millions of dollars in multiple cities across the United States. Now, let's tie this all up to something that's actually Second Amendment related. And trust me, all of this is Second Amendment related. We go to groups like Moms Demand Action or Everytown or the millions of others of gun safe groups or whatever they call themselves these days. Whatever cushiony, pillow, soft, fluffy term they like to use, which really means guns are bad and we want to take them away groups. They hate your Second Amendment rights. They continue to talk about how they want to take away law-abiding citizens' ability to keep and bear arms for the sake of public safety. They often use phrases like, and I know you've heard these, every day 130 people are killed with guns, or gun violence epidemic. We hear that a ton. Maybe protect our children, or AR-15s are bad, assault weapons. You hear these phrases all the time. Maybe you've heard weapons of war, right? That one gets used a ton. Or every 11 minutes, a black American is shot, being wounded or killed because of a gun. They use these phrases because they invoke emotional responses. Sometimes powerful, heartwarming, gut-wrenching. They're not just happenstance phrases. They're deliberately thought out and generated phrases or sentences to invoke an emotional response in you. That's the purpose. They didn't pick those words just by happenstance because they sound cool or they fit the narrative. They're engineered sentences to generate an emotional response. That's how they do it. Now, we can easily look at the actual data and see what the data says about all this stuff. So, as of 2024, or up-to-date information, 44,447 total firearms deaths. Total. 62% of those are suicides. That's 27,593, by the way. 35% are homicides. That's 15,000, roughly 15,364. Guns, let's see. Guns are used in 76% of those homicides. There's a significant drop in gun homicides in 2024. It was down 16.7% over the previous year. And that's actually from Everytown's own data, their own studies. Now, mass shootings. We hear about how they're every day. There's 7,000 mass shootings in the United States. The FBI, their active shooter incidents in 2024 was 24. Now, there's a little bit different, like how they define. That's the other thing. How mass shooting is defined makes a difference. How the FBI defines it and how Everytown defines it, or the Gun Control or Gun Violence Archive defines it, that might not be apples to apples. That's the other thing. How the data is collected is important to understand what the data is saying, or what they want you to believe the data says. Now, the Gun Violence Archive, they say their mass shooting is 4 or more victims shot. Not killed, but shot, including injured, right? Now, because of their definition, that's 502 mass shootings. Much, much bigger criteria. Now, they're also including gang violence, domestic violence, or stuff that may not have happened in a public setting. The way it's defined also drives the narrative of the information given. Does that make sense? I hope so. Now, defensive gun uses, something that the anti-gun crowds or the gun safety groups never want to talk about. In fact, they consistently downgrade the reality of defensive gun use. Now, John Lott, we've talked about this many, many times. His information, or his independent study a few years ago, so same with Kleck, they also did the same study, showed that there was thousands of times a day, up to, it was like somewhere between 520,000 or something to, let's see, let's get this right, hundreds of thousands to millions times annually. That's all I wrote down in my notes here. And some of those were just simply brandishing the gun, showing the gun, not one shot fired, that stopped an incident. That's pretty intriguing. Again, Everytown or Moms Demand don't use that information. They don't like that information because it doesn't meet their criteria, or it doesn't construct the narrative that they want you to see. Another inconvenient fact that these gun control groups don't like to talk about are the use of handguns compared to the scary assault rifles. In fact, they're actually understand this information gap, and they're trying to change the way even handguns are talked about. Assault weapon commonly is used in so many colloquial terms, but I've even heard them say assault pistol. Listen, any weapon used to assault somebody would be an assault weapon, correct? I would think so. Now, they don't like you to hear that handguns far more are used in gun crime. In fact, the AR-15 is used in less than 2% of all gun crime. That is a huge difference to what they actually want the public to see, right? They think the scary AR is used in every gun crime, in every continent, and it's because of the Second Amendment and America's gun culture that these gun crimes throughout the world happen. They like to create a narrative that invokes an emotional response against an object and against your Second Amendment rights. Why should we even care about this? What is the point? Well, you see, narratives create emotional responses. Those emotional responses shape laws, shape policies, and impact your Second Amendment rights. In fact, it impacts all of your rights as an American citizen. In fact, we could even go more broad and see how narrative has changed the perspective of people in other countries. Look at the violence that's happening in England or in Ireland or in Australia or in Canada. The narrative was presented in a way that people were happy to give up a way to defend themselves, believing that their country would take care of them, or believing that an object, a simple object, was too dangerous for anyone to have. And then, surprising to no one, violence crept up in a way that these individuals couldn't fight back. In fact, now, if an individual does fight back in some of these countries, they're the one that is prosecuted and put in jail. It's very topsy-turvy. And it makes me nervous here that because of an emotional response that's given effectively, that people here, that Americans, die-hard, conservative, red, white, and blue-blooded Americans are willing to give up a right just so they can have some comfort. Steve, that couldn't happen. Okay, let's talk about the Patriot Act. We're not going to talk about it right now, but maybe you should look it up. Because apparently, a lot of us Americans were totally willing to give up a little bit of freedom for some supposed safety. And now you take off your shoes to fly in an airport. No, not fly in an airport, but get on a plane. You know what I'm trying to say. Looking at, whenever you hear the words epidemic or crisis or public safety, those are kind of buzzwords that you need to be paying attention to, because whatever follows or preceded that little paragraph is probably engineered and nuanced in a way to generate a response in you to be willing to give up something. How do you fight back on this? Again, first thing you need to ask yourselves, and this is thanks to Chase Hughes, check him out, pretty awesome guy, is what is the narrative that they want me to believe in this story? What does this person or this story want me to know? That's the very first thing you need to ask yourself. Then, there's some other things we can do. Think of a clear sight picture. Okay? In order to make perfect shots on your target, you need to have your sights aligned, and you need to have a good sight picture, and then you need to focus, laser focus on that front sight. Correct? Same thing when it comes to these news stories. We need to get our sights aligned, understand what the story is and what they want us to believe from this story. Then we hear the narratives. We hear those buzzwords, public safety, gun violence, right? But we don't just believe the surface. You need to learn how to go to the primary sources. If they cite any kind of report, go to that report. See who funded that report, where it came from, who the doctor was, or the professor, or the reporter. Dig into it. Once you feel like you've gone as far as you can down that little thread, go to the primary sources. Look at the actual data. Look at UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting from the FBI. That gives you all the raw data. No fluff, really boring, sometimes hard to navigate, but once you start to understand how things are broke down, you can see what the real data says, not what a group of people want you to believe, but the actual data. Another thing you can do is look to see what other news organizations are saying. Are they parroting the same thing? Are they citing the same sources? This is done to create some sort of legitimacy or authority in whatever site, whatever piece of information they're citing. Again, primary sources are key to dissecting what they're actually giving you. Look, we've talked a lot about a lot of different things in this particular episode of the Range Minded podcast. And I know it was a little different than something that you may have been used to or expecting from me. But I felt it was important that you understand how you are being manipulated and how you're being shown certain things in a certain way that creates a picture that may not be the entire picture. In reality, we really just water skied over this topic. We've talked about how some of the history of manipulation, how we've seen current events being tugged and pushed in a certain way, all because of a narrative, all because of a story framed in a certain way. We've even looked at how modern anti-gun groups skew the data or use certain phrases or words to control the American public in a way to be willing to give up a fundamental right. It's important to be able to see that. Again, think of your sight picture when you're out shooting at the range. We align our sights on the target. We focus on our target to make sure that it's lined up. And then we come back to that front sight and have a crystal clear, sharp focus on that front sight as we press that trigger back. The way we consume the media is the same. We look at the target that the media wants us to believe. What's the story? What's the thing they want us to believe out of their story? Then we go to the data, our sites, right? We go to the actual source of the data and get the numbers or the stories for ourselves. Then we can have I'm not taking that out. We can have an educated understanding of what the reality is without the nuance. That's key. Not being manipulated is a fundamental right, I think, in itself. Americans are meant to be free. Remember the first 3 words of the preamble. We, the people, we are in charge. Not the media, not our leadership. They all use the same tactics to convince you to believe a certain thing in a certain way. That's dangerous. Again, we saw that in the Patriot Act. And I think we see it in other things or events that happen in our nation's history that kind of change its course. We need to be better at digging into the original source. There's a lot of things you can watch, like I did today. Man, I'm starting to cough. They don't want me to share this information. I was watching a lot about the church hearings. Look that up. Is in the 73, I think. The Frank Church congressional hearings. Oh boy. Look up Operation Mockingbird. That'll be fun. The fog that's being created by the media is real and is meant to distract you and dissuade you and to upset you and to make you tired at the world around you and almost give up and just trust. It is at that moment that you should do the exact opposite. And don't just believe everything they say. Don't believe everything I say. I don't want you to just trust me blindly. I want you to do your own research. You see, because when you become your own researcher, when you dig into the sources, you become the authority on what you see. You become someone that can actually extrapolate real information in the cloudy, muddy, murky garbage that we consume every day. They want people to be sheep. They want people to blindly follow along. They meaning the media. They want you to believe a narrative and trust that narrative and blindly tribalize yourself into one group or another. We shouldn't be that way. We should be researching. We should be diving in. We should be reading old books. It's okay. The more we understand, the less we can be manipulated. It's important because we don't want to be controlled. We're Americans. We're meant to be free and independent, and that includes in our thoughts. Don't be manipulated. You have the power. You are somebody that's far more important to this whole American story than what the media, or even, honestly, our leadership wants you to believe. We the people are the power. We control this country's destination. We control the destiny. We control what our children and our grandchildren inherit. Be the one that gives them value. Awesome. If you liked this show, don't forget you can like, share, all that crap. That would be greatly appreciated. You know the drill. There's links in the description on how you can help support the show. That'd be awesome if you did. And, I guess just wait till the next episode. Appreciate you guys. One of the most important things, or some of the most important things you can do, I'm leaving that, I'm not editing that out. First of all is you can stay free. That's right. Stay free. Then you can stay safe. And finally, you can stay range-minded. You guys are awesome. Stay free, my friends. Till the next time.